America is the country that started the AI race, and as President of the United States, Trump declared that America is going to win it. When it comes to AI data centers, they are an order of magnitude more power-hungry than the data centers we're used to since the Internet age. After August 1st, negotiations with China and Canada remain at a standstill, and Trump's latest tariff moves are now colliding with America's rising demand for energy and critical minerals to fuel its AI and manufacturing ambitions. Behind those headlines is a reality Trump can't afford to overlook. The United States relies heavily on Canadian supply, and in the race to lead in AI and semiconductor production, losing the connection would hurt Washington far more than Ottawa. I think the biggest concern, and the one that the industry itself really needs to address, is the energy usage. That is just huge. The industry and the energy producers have got to figure that out. They've got to find a better way of providing that energy. Trump's latest tariff push is now colliding with America's surging demand for energy, the same power needed to fuel AI data centers and bring semiconductor manufacturing back home. His proposal for a 100% tariff on imported chips is designed to pressure companies into building or investing in U.S. facilities. Apple, for example, pledged $100 billion in new American projects. That kind of industrial build-out comes with a hidden cost: electricity. In Virginia, home to the largest data center market in the world, Dominion Energy projects that demand could double over the next 15 years. AI data centers alone can draw more than a gigawatt on a single campus. And Virginia is only one example. Across the United States, from Oregon's server farms to Texas's tech corridors, AI data centers are multiplying, each requiring massive and continuous power. Furthermore, bringing semiconductor fabrication home will add to the load. All of it depends on reliable large-scale energy supply, and that's where Canada's role becomes unavoidable. So when I talk about being an energy superpower, I always say in both clean and conventional energies. So what does that mean? Yes, it does mean oil and gas. It means using our oil and gas. It also means more exports without question. Canada is already America's largest energy supplier. According to 2024 trade data, the U.S. imported roughly 3.8 to 4.3 million barrels of Canadian crude oil per day. Natural gas imports from Canada averaged about 8.5 billion cubic feet per day, up 7% from the year before. Electricity flows across the border totaled about 11.4 terawatt-hours, enough to power roughly 1 million U.S. homes for a year. Uranium from Canada made up around 27% of total U.S. imports, the largest share of any country, sustaining a big part of America's nuclear fleet. On top of that are critical minerals. We bring as interlocutors here all of the critical minerals of Ontario. So for example, nickel. Nickel is something that comes from Ontario, it's high grade, and it's not replaceable from other places in the world. Ontario's high-grade nickel has no domestic substitute in the US for certain defense and battery applications. British Columbia's germanium is essential for fiber optics, solar panels, and night vision systems, and the Teck smelter in Trail is the only Canadian source. These are not commodities that can be swapped in from other suppliers without years of supply chain adjustments. If these flows were disrupted, the ripple effects would be immediate. Industrial plants, data centers, and chip fabs would face higher costs and possible delays, and replacing Canada's unique mix of proximity, scale, and stability would be extremely difficult. We can be an energy superpower, and we have all the components in nuclear, in hydro, in potentially carbon capture and storage, which is going to be one of the determinants of industrial competitiveness. Prime Minister Mark Carney has chosen not to rush into a deal. His strategy is to keep dialogue open, but refuse terms that would weaken Canada's long-term position. He's accelerating investment in domestic extraction and processing of energy and minerals, and reinforcing Canada's value to allies beyond North America by signaling readiness to cooperate, but also the capacity to stand alone. Carney is making clear that Canada is not cornered. The message to Washington is that Canada's resources are a shared strength, but only if the partnership is respected. Pushing too far could backfire. Without Canadian energy and minerals, U.S. industries risk higher costs, slower growth, and greater dependence on less reliable partners. A dangerous prospect for an administration promising a manufacturing revival and AI leadership. In this mutual dependency, Canada holds leverage that matters more to U.S. stability than the other way around. And Trump must decide whether the price of sidelining Canada is worth any gains at the table. President Trump's sweeping global tariffs for more than 90 countries have come into effect. From a blanket minimum of 10% up to a high of 50%, with some hefty levies on some of the United States' major trading partners. Let's control what we can control, not what Donald Trump dictates, but what we can control. On August 7, U.S. Customs and Border Protection began collecting a sweeping new round of import tariffs signed by President Donald Trump. Rates now range from 10 to 50% on more than 60 countries. Brazil faces 50%. Switzerland is at 39%. Laos and Myanmar are at 40%. The European Union, Japan, and South Korea have 15% rates under new agreements, and the United Kingdom pays 10% after its own deal. Trump also announced a potential 100% tariff on foreign-made computer chips, with exemptions for companies building in the United States. Apple pledged a $100 billion investment, but the chip tariff is not yet formalized. And what it means is for America, their U.S. levies on tariffs are now at the highest level for centuries. The president put out that post on social media saying billions of dollars in tariffs are now flowing into the United States of America today. And according to a research center at Yale, the new tariffs could cost an average American family an extra $2,400 a year. By July, the U.S. government had already collected over $150 billion from existing tariffs. Economists stress these costs fall on U.S. importers, often passed to consumers. June's Consumer Price Index showed prices rising for appliances, clothing, and furniture. Beyond North America, the same tariff logic is hitting other exporters. India faces a jump from 25% to a threatened 50% over Russian oil purchases, while South Africa warns of job losses as U.S. tariffs erode past advantages and push them to hunt thinner margin markets in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. The takeaway for Ottawa is simple. Countries are racing to reroute exports, so Canada's own diversification, already visible with Ontario grain shifting to Europe, has to move fast and stay disciplined. Here in Canada, officials are already talking about the impact of tariffs because President Trump hit Canada with an increase of 35% tariffs last Friday. Canada has been under these new pressures since August 1, when Trump's administration raised tariffs on non-USMCA goods to 35%. Over 85% of bilateral trade remains tariff-free, but targeted sectors are feeling the pinch. Softwood lumber already faces heavy U.S. duties. Steel, aluminium, and certain manufactured goods now face added barriers. Some exporters are adjusting quickly. Ontario is both a major grain producer and a major grain buyer. The province imports large volumes of certain U.S. grains, making it the #1 customer for farmers in 35 to 40 American states, while also exporting Canadian-grown grain abroad. Now, with Trump's 35% tariff on non-USMCA goods, some of Ontario's own export shipments are being diverted away from the U.S. market and into Europe. That shift may help Canada diversify, but it also means U.S. grain farmers could lose one of their largest and most reliable customers if cross-border buying slows. The Prime Minister was tight-lipped a day after saying he'd consider removing some counter-tariffs on American goods if it would help Canadian industries. Prime Minister Mark Carney met in Ottawa with his cabinet and premiers to align the national approach. His message: keep talks with Washington open, avoid bad deals, and shield domestic industries from immediate harm. He has suggested removing some Canadian counter-tariffs if it benefits key sectors. Provincial leaders differ. Ontario's Doug Ford supports tariff-for-tariff measures, and warns against trusting Trump. Saskatchewan's Scott Moe wants to reduce or drop counter-tariffs to lower domestic costs. Trade experts recommend keeping retaliation as a bargaining tool, without escalating unnecessarily. Canada is also leaning on major industrial projects. Volkswagen's $7 billion Canadian power company battery plant in St. Thomas is moving forward, despite uncertainty, while procurement in other areas is strained. The Amherstburg fire chief cites delays and higher costs for a $3.1 million US-made fire truck, with a 3-year build time due to tariffs and supply shortages. The coming weeks will reveal whether Trump formalizes the 100% chip tariff, and how exemptions are defined. Canada may adjust counter-tariffs to protect vulnerable sectors, while maintaining leverage. In the US, early price increases could spread, adding pressure to import-reliant industries. Trump's tariffs are both an economic weapon and a political signal. For Carney, the challenge is to protect Canada's economy, while keeping options open. The choices made now will decide whether this standoff deepens, or shifts toward a fragile new balance. You say, and now he could push suddenly, all of a sudden. Open up the USMCA. What would the impact be for Canada, and for the US, if President Trump pulled out of that agreement? He wants to hurt the American people. And that's exactly what he's doing. A tariff on Canada is a tax on the American people. Since August 1st, Canada's trade with the United States has faced its toughest strain in decades, with Canada now among the hardest hit by Trump's latest global tariff measures. Across the entire country of Canada, probably closer to 20 million Americans rely on Canada for jobs, and vice versa. We rely on jobs with trade with the US, but it's just hurting both countries. Ontario Premier Doug Ford didn't wait to sound the alarm. Speaking directly to American viewers on CNN, he warned that Trump could end or reopen USMCA with a single signature, years ahead of the scheduled 2026 review. Ford stressed that these tariffs are not just punishing Canadian exporters, they are effectively taxing American consumers. He pointed to recent job losses in the United States. More than 37,000 manufacturing jobs have been lost since April, the lowest employment level in that sector in 5 years, and $6.22 billion in new costs for the U.S. auto industry. Ford's choice to take this message to U.S. media wasn't just about defending Ontario, it was aimed at building political pressure inside the United States, where the economic fallout is already visible. While Ford has chosen to confront Trump's tariff agenda head-on in the public arena, Prime Minister Mark Carney is taking a different path, one defined by strategic patience and careful calculation. Of course, the Prime Minister has to weigh all industries, not just the specific industries that are immediately impacted, but weigh industries against industries, region against region, and the unity of a country. I think it's been a very wise, strategic, and cohesive approach on behalf of all Canadians. Prime Minister Mark Carney's response has been deliberate. After the August 1st increase, Ottawa did not announce a fresh round of retaliatory tariffs. Instead, Carney emphasized keeping channels to Washington open and weighing the national interest across all sectors before acting. Carney's calculation rests on the fact that USMCA still shields most of Canada's trade. In June, Royal Bank of Canada data showed that 92% of Canadian exports to the US entered duty-free. The remaining 8%, largely steel, aluminium, and other sensitive products, faced an average tariff of about 30%. Rather than rush into concessions, Carney's team is pursuing market diversification. Trade with the European Union has grown by double digits. Exports to the United Kingdom are up, and high-level ministers have been in Mexico to coordinate strategy and avoid the divide-and-conquer approach many in Ottawa expect from Trump in any USMCA renegotiation. Yes, we're having discussions with the Americans. Prime Minister Carney wouldn't say when he'll next speak to US President Donald Trump, but Ontario's Premier didn't mince words. What's the general impression of Trump in Canada? He's probably the most disliked politician in the world in Canada. Ford and Carney are working toward the same end, protecting Canada's economic position. But their methods could not be more different. Ford speaks in blunt terms, calling Trump the most disliked political figure in Canada, and focusing on the American costs of tariffs. Carney stays measured, avoids personal attacks, and times his interventions to maximize leverage at the negotiating table. This dual track, public pressure and quiet diplomacy, has so far kept Canada's response cohesive, while signaling to Washington that Ottawa will not fold quickly. The threat of an early USMCA rupture is real. Trump has shown he's willing to move outside established timelines if it strengthens his bargaining position. Yet, Canada retains leverage, strategic minerals critical to US manufacturing, energy exports, and a strong agricultural trade. Trump also faces rising consumer prices and job losses at home, which could narrow his room to escalate. The challenge for Canada will be to maintain its stance, without closing the door on solutions that serve both sides. The period since August 1st has revealed a high-stakes test of endurance between Washington and Ottawa. Trump is pressing hard with tariffs to force movement. Carney is meeting that pressure with strategic patience, while Ford raises the volume in the US media. How long each side can hold their position, and what political cost Trump is willing to bear, will determine whether this standoff ends in a balanced agreement, or in a rupture that reshapes North American trade far sooner than planned.